G'day, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another crazy dose of EV and net zero insanity in MGUY EV news for Monday the 30th of December 2024. We're closing in on 100k subscribers, which is insane. So if you're one of the majority of my viewers that aren't subscribed, just click that button below. It'd be great to have you as a subscriber and you won't miss out on any future videos. If you want to support this channel also, why not buy me a coffee? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. So firstly, this is a story which just goes to show how pointless and utterly fruitless the attempts at net zero in Western Europe, the US and Australia really is. When you look at countries like China, as we'll see in a minute, burning coal like there's no tomorrow, and India ain't going to be stopping burning oil anytime soon. So just think about that when you're driving your EV and you're thinking all of that good things you're doing for the environment by driving an emissions-free vehicle. Just think about India burning thousands and thousands of barrels of oil more every year just to keep their economy going, which good for them. Bring their populations out of poverty is more important to them than saving the planet. India's BPCL to invest $11 billion in new refinery complex. India's Bharat Petroleum Corporation Limited, BPCL, plans to invest as much as $11 billion in a new refining and petrochemical complex in South India, the chairman of the country's second largest fuel retailer told Reuters in an interview. We feel there is a big opportunity in refining sector. India's primary energy demand itself is also going to increase 3 to 4 times as its economy expands, BPCL chairman G. Krishna Kumar told Reuters this week. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. The refiner has already launched some preliminary work on the project, including land purchase. Let's just go to this bit here, which is key. India is expected to account for 25% of global oil demand growth this year and next, the EIA reckons. This year, Indian oil consumption growth is estimated at around 220,000 barrels per day, BPD, compared to China's 90,000 barrels per day growth. That's just growth. That's not the absolute amount. In 2025, Indian oil demand is set to grow by 330,000 barrels per day. I mean, and we think that we're going to help by getting a few combustion cars off the road and driving EVs in Australia or in Europe. I mean, it just goes to show what a joke this whole idea of net zero really is. And let's have a look at China. While India burns more oil every year to keep its economy going, good for India, China is just going to burn more coal in order to make all the EVs for idiotic countries like Australia that are going to buy them. And this little graphic here shows how China eclipses Germany and the USA over the period between 1990 and 2020. I mean, it just goes vertically upwards. Little blip during the financial crisis, and then just keeps going, and it will keep going. Oh look, the Paris Climate Agreement, and it made no difference whatsoever. It goes to 2018. And I can bet you, I can guarantee that it will continue to go up because China, like India, is more concerned about lifting its populations out of a life of poverty than it is about some ridiculous, futile aim to save the planet. If you think things can't get any more stupid in the UK, well, just as people are moving towards hybrids, which are a lower emission kind of vehicle, the UK government says that it's going to ban them from 2030 because they're not environmentally friendly enough. They're not zero emissions. Doesn't matter if it's, reducing emissions. That's not good enough. We have to go all out, absolute zero emissions. So the hybrids, which people are turning to because not only do they help the environment, but they also provide the security of having a internal combustion engine under the hood so that you don't have to rely on the ridiculous notion of having to charge your car. And people are gravitating towards hybrids, but nope, that's not good enough. Best-selling hybrids to be banned from 2030 under net zero crackdown. Strict limit on CO2 emissions would mean popular models can no longer be sold. Some of Britain's best-selling hybrid cars will be banned from sale after 2030 under a net zero crackdown proposed by ministers. The government favours a strict limit on CO2 emissions. That would mean popular new hybrids made by Range Rover, Ford, VW and Nissan could no longer be sold. When you think back to that China story and the India story about, the burning 330,000 barrels per day more in 2025, and we're banning CO2 emissions from hybrids? It's absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. We are committing economic suicide for absolutely no benefit whatsoever. And the same point is raised in this great article here. I won't read out too much of this, but link in the description. The Spectator, Ross Clark, he used to write a lot for the Telegraph and it was always right on point. Now he writes for the Spectator. I'll put a PDF of this one because I think it might be paywalled. Labour is out of its depth with electric cars. Yes, it is. When Vauxhall announced the closure of its Luton plant a few weeks ago, it seemed that the government had finally woken up to how the zero-emission vehicle ZEV mandate was killing off Britain's car industry. We were promised a consultation on the rules, which demand that manufacturers ensure 22% of their cars, you've heard it all before, that sell this are pure electric, with fines of £15,000 for every petrol or diesel car sold over the limit. This morning we got it. Does it promise salvation for our remaining car factories? Sadly not. The government is suggesting that manufacturers be allowed a little more flexibility in balancing car and van sales. If they overshoot their target on van sales, for example, they might be allowed to undershoot their target on car sales without penalty. But that's about it. Otherwise, the government has used the opportunity to tighten up the restrictions on the sale of hybrids after 2030. Limiting how many grams of carbon dioxide they are allowed to emit per kilometre before hybrids are banished for good from 2035. There is nothing in the consultation to acknowledge that take-up of electric cars from car buyers is well below what was imagined when the ZEV rules were drawn up by the Conservative government, more fool them, in 2023. On the contrary, new Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander seems determined to stick her head even further into the sand, asserting in many cases ZEVs are significantly cheaper to run, maintain and repair than their petrol and diesel equivalents. This is a reference to a year-old press release from the Energy, Climate and Intelligence Unit, an EU-funded PR operation, which claims that petrol and car drivers paid £700 a year more to run their vehicles than they would have done had they owned an equivalent electric one. Sadly, it provides no workings, but if it is assumed that people always charge their EVs at home at night, it is living in a different world from the 8 million UK households who have no off-street parking. Nor is it very informative to compare running costs between high-tax petrol and low-tax electricity. One day the government is going to come up with new taxes to replace the $28 billion a year that it stands to lose in petrol duty. Yes, absolutely. Go and read the whole thing at the link in the description. Again, another long article about how the idea of renewables from the wind and the sun are just falling apart because they're so unreliable. You can't rely on the weather to generate your electricity. And one of the things that's happening in Europe, and it happens quite a lot in winter, is this Dunkelflaute, which is basically where you get a massive area of high pressure, anticyclone, and it just sits there like for days, weeks potentially, blocking high as it's called, and you get mist, fog, low cloud, and zero wind. So you don't get solar and you don't get wind power either. Europe, the fall of the holy renewable empire. Literally flat, dark calm. Dunkelflaute is characterized by a simultaneous lack of wind and sun in winter when demand for electricity in Germany is at its highest. Brilliant. On December the 12th of this year, for example, German electricity production from wind and solar power was 1/30th the demand for it. But this is for the planet, right? Not even close. Despite its commitment to so-called green energies, Germany still has a high carbon footprint due to its increased reliance on coal and lignite to make up for energy shortfalls. Germany's high electricity prices are leading to the relocation of its industry as companies look for sites where energy costs are more affordable. How can you stay viable when you pay 3 times more for electricity than your competitors? Whole swathes of Germany's proud industry are collapsing. We only remember the big names, VW, BASF, Mercedes-Benz, but every big company that disappears or downsizes takes with it a myriad of small and medium-sized enterprises that end up collapsing along with it. Dependence on unreliable energy sources, wind and solar, combined with the hasty phase-out of nuclear power, has made Germany's electricity the most expensive in Europe and compromises the country's and ultimately the continent's energy autonomy. Well, if you've been following this channel for any length of time, none of this will come as a surprise, because the idea that you can rely on a modern industrialized electricity grid on the weather is nothing short of lunacy, and finally it's coming home to roost, and people are starting to realize that we've seen it coming, and here it is. Oh, and this is hilarious. This is a survey of EV drivers that says 92% of them won't return to gas cars. And it's obviously published by Inside EVs, which is a wildly pro-EV publication. So not exactly a surprise there then. Switching to an electric car apparently ruins combustion cars for the vast majority of owners. Electric vehicles are quiet, fast and packed with tech, and these advantages leave a lasting impression on owners. Very few of them, if any, would switch back to a combustion car after going electric, at least according to a new study published by the Global EV Alliance. Now, I wonder how biased that organisation would be, considering its aims are to be the voice of the electric vehicle movement all around the globe. We want to collect best practices, inspiration and information from EV drivers' organisations and their members in order to help inform and inspire each other to accelerate electric mobility in their own regions, countries and worldwide. We are a grassroots non-profit organisation, so I think they'd be pretty keen to get some good results from a survey. And guess what? They find, after 23,000 EV owners in 18 countries, including the US, Brazil and key European markets, and found that 92% of respondents said they would stick to electric cars for their next car purchase. Of those who would not choose a pure EV again, just 1% would go back to gasoline or diesel, and 4% would pick a plug-in hybrid. Which is really interesting, because the McKinsey Global Mobility Survey from just a couple of months ago showed that the figure was more like 29% would go back to an internal combustion engine car, up to, yay, well done Australia, 49%. In Australia, 46% in the US. Quite extraordinary. I'll link to that study below as well. But it's just all fantasy. Just like the EV and net zero stuff is all fantasy, even the surveys are fantasy as well. And finally, we have lots of madness from California. Where else? Where they are considering seriously banning classic cars. All of those wonderful cars from the 1900s on to the present day, anything that has a combustion engine basically is going to be banned. You know, they're not going to be allowed to be driven ever. You know, the fact that they contribute, given the numbers of them, essentially zero to global CO2 emissions doesn't matter, because this isn't about saving the planet, it's about banning fun, as Lauren explains.
There's a new push to ban classic cars. Here we go again. The state of California is taking away our freedoms. They are looking seriously at instituting or allowing local governments to institute zero emission zones in the near future. Now, the California Air Resources Board, known as CARB, is trying to make the U.S. remove classic cars from our lives. They're reportedly gathering information about classic cars and how their owners use them. We knew something like this was coming to the U.S., and California would likely be the first. And this is concerning for very many reasons. The collector car market is huge, and the United States is the world's largest market for classic cars, with revenue between 14 and 15 billion U.S. dollars generated in 2020. And 1 in 6 jobs was tied to the auto industry in the U.S., and the classic car market in the United States is projected to grow some $18.77 billion by 2024.
So there you go. I'll leave a link to the video in the description, obviously. This isn't about saving the planet. It's about telling people what to do, stopping them having fun, making people miserable. That's what the world is like nowadays. We have all these dictators telling us what we should do and how we should behave. It's absolutely scandalous, and EVs and net zero is just one of many of these attempts just to rein in people's enjoyment of life. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. Really hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next one. Bye for now.